pleasure to introduce the Ketchikan artist Kathryn Rousso. Kathy learned to weave traditional Ravenstail, chilkat, and cedar bark and spruce root baskets at the Totem Heritage Center in Ketchikan and at the University of Alaska Southeast. After earning an MFA in Textile Arts and Costume Design from the University of California, Davis in 2000, she spent a year in Guatemala on a Fulbright scholarship, researching and documenting agave fiber textiles. This led to her continued research from southern Mexico to northern Colombia, weaving contemporary baskets, reflecting her experiences and environments along the way. Her work culminated with the University of Arizona Press publication Miigweh Journey, Discovering Textiles in Guatemala, and the exhibit A Sense of Place. All right. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay. Hello. Is this good where I'm standing? Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone for coming and Jackie Manning for offering me this opportunity to speak about my work. And it kind of came about, I think I sent just a blind email up to the museum a few months ago and just wanting to know when the exhibit was going to open. And I think it got rerouted to Jackie, and then we communicated after that, and now I'm here. But I'm thrilled to have two pieces in this year's Anchorage Museum's All-Alaska Biennial, which opened here tonight at the Alaska State Museum. The baskets are part of a series which I will talk about in the latter part of this presentation. And so this basket is, let me see, I'm going to do this. This basket and this basket are the two that are out in the exhibit, and I will talk about those later. So first I'm going to do a bit of background. So, while my ancestors are not from here, someone in my lineage must have been a weaver, because from a young age this has been my calling. My journey has not been straight or easy, but I'm sure that I am doing what I was meant to do. The first part of this talk is how the pieces fit together in the development of my style as a basket weaver, and the second is how weaving recently kept me from literally becoming a basket case. I will take you on a journey and talk about the influences and experiences that affect my inspiration, process, techniques, materials, and designs. Okay. I first set foot in Southeast Alaska in the late 1970s as a U.S. Forest Service survey crew member, and for several years I lived in remote tent camps, mostly on Chichagof Island. In 1983, I moved to Ketchikan and continued to work in remote logging camps on Prince of Wales Island. One winter, a coworker convinced me to take a basket weaving class at the Totem Heritage Center in Ketchikan. I cannot remember who taught it, but that was the beginning of what eventually became my career. From 1986 to 1989, and this is a later date, so this isn't what I looked like in 1986. That's old, because someone asked me that before. But from 1986 to 1989, I lived in a Guatemalan Cachiquel Mayan village as a Peace Corps volunteer. And so these are some of the neighbors, these are some of the people that I lived with in Guatemala for 2 years. While my actual job was agroforestry and soil conservation, I spent 2 years learning how to weave with a backstrap loom. And this is my neighbor's mother weaving with a backstrap loom, and she was one of the best weavers in the village. And the backstrap loom works with there's a strap, let's see, where is this little thing? So there's a strap right there around her back, and it's connected to this end of the loom, and this end is connected to a house post, and the tension is achieved by the weaver moving forward or backwards, and that's how the tension is achieved with the warp on the loom. Let's see. So I spent 2 years learning how to weave with the backstrap loom and about Guatemalan weaving traditions. My first obstacle was finding the tools I needed, especially not understanding Cachiquel or even Spanish very well. But eventually I collected everything, and then I was instructed to weave in the traditional colors of the village traje or clothing. I started out weaving servietas, which are cloths that would be used to wrap tortillas in, and eventually a couple of huipiles, which is like what I'm wearing, this is a huipil, or blouse. Most of my allowance was spent on textiles, and I probably supported many weavers and their families the 2 years I lived in the community. Upon completion of my time, I traveled through Andean South America and went home with many Guatemalan, Peruvian, Bolivian, and Ecuadorian textiles. Also baskets, coca bags, and xigras, which are net bags. This was the beginning of an appreciation and obsession of everything and anything woven. Back in, Back in Southeast Alaska in late 1989, I traveled to Juneau to take a class from Cheryl Samuel, which I thought was to be chilkat weaving, but as it turned out, she had just begun reintroducing the geometric style of raven's tail to the region after being dormant for 200 years. Also during this time, I took a spruce root basketry class with Jan Criswell. Those were both at the university. For the next 10 years, so there's raven's tail. For the next 10 years, I took classes, mostly at the Totem Heritage Center, from Cheryl Samuel, Dolores Churchill, the late Irene Bieniek, Dorica Jackson, Evelyn Vanderhoop, Diane Douglas Willard, and many others. Besides classes, I wove on the mother robe, a raven's tail robe made by weavers from Ketchikan to Whitehorse, and now housed at the Tongass Historical Museum in Ketchikan. This was also the beginning of the Raven's Tail Guild in the newsletter. Also during this time, Juneau weavers, there's a couple here, created the Hands Across Time robes, which is actually on display. You can see it, the Dye Lab around the corner here? You can see it through the window there. And I think, will it be back out? Next summer. Okay, it'll be on display. Let's see. Cheryl Samuel planted the seeds, and it's just amazing what grew. I taught Raven's Tail for many years in Saxman and a few other places. It was an exciting time to be a weaver in Southeast Alaska. I have not attended Celebration in a number of years, but I can only imagine how abundant Raven's Tail is now. So, here's a chilkat. Let's see. Also during this time, I was able to take extended time off from work in the winter and traveled to South America and Indonesia in search of interesting textiles. One of my favorite activities is wandering through weekly markets. There are always interesting items, and one never knows what a vendor will have. Indonesia's ferry system, called Pelni, allowed me to go between the eastern islands known as Nusa Tenggara, which I did for several winters. As with Latin America, loom woven textiles are well known, but was the lesser appreciated woven items, usually bags and baskets, that began to catch my eye. This is when I began asking weavers I met in markets if I could visit them at home to see their processes. One winter in West Timor, I became obsessed with these. These are betel nut containers. They are beautiful plated palm baskets covered with red cloth and intricate beadwork. And they're bags and bamboo cylinders, and it's all related to the betel nut culture. Betel nut is like coca, it's chewed and it's like a stimulant. And these are all the containers that would hold the leaves and the lime powder and everything. They're amazing works of art with great cultural significance. The universal language of weaving came in handy here, although after a few years, my Bahasa Indonesia was pretty good. A few events in 1999 forced me to reevaluate my life, and after some soul searching, I decided to follow my heart and began the process of pursuing an MFA from the University of California at Davis, which was a good fit as it turned out. Besides the required curriculum, I received an education and insight into the Bay Area textile scene, including wearable arts, and more importantly, Ed Rosbach, who is considered the father of contemporary basketry, and influenced many of my professors. Another pivotal part of graduate school was a trip I took to New Zealand, where I attended a Maori weaving hui and learned about this plant, Phorium tenax, or New Zealand flax, and tonico. This is also when I began to develop my own style. One of my professors encouraged me to work large, which was difficult because I had lived on a boat when I wasn't at grad school and I was used to working really small. But eventually I settled into medium-sized work, which I continue today. Upon graduation, I was lucky to score a Fulbright scholarship and returned to Guatemala to research agave fiber net and woven bags. And this was my departure point. This is a net bag, and it's made from, this is the agave plant, which is the same plant that tequila comes from, but in Guatemala, the fibers are what are extracted from the leaves and not the liquid. I was studying net bags and things like hammocks and horse gear, and my affiliate was the Museo Ixchel del Traje Indígena, or the Textile Museum in Guatemala. So I spent a year traveling around the country, learning everything I could about agave fiber or maguey textiles. This meant time in small remote villages and wonderful weekly markets. I looked at a lot of mules too, because these are agave, that's called a tenedor, the part around his tail, and then those big net bags. And the big net bags in the markets, they only sold them in pairs, and this is why, because you need 2 for a mule. You can't just have 1, because they balance out. But I began talking to vendors about other interesting products, which led me to research and document palm, reed, cane, bamboo, baskets, mats, hats, brooms, etc., eventually from southern Mexico to northern Colombia over the next 15 years. Visiting artists to learn the entire process from harvesting to production and marketing is one of my passions. Between trips south of the border, I wove baskets related to my experiences, and over many years I developed a style that incorporates elements from these many traditions. The top bands of my baskets are twined. Weft twining is a universal basket weaving technique that I first learned in Ketchikan. Two-strand twining, which this is a diagram of two-strand, is the most common weave structure where 2 strands, which are the red and the green, cross each other as they make a half or full twist around 1 or 2 warps, always at the same angle to enclose a successive group of warps. 3-strand twining, where there's 3 different strands, and braiding alternate around the warps, are used in basketry, raven's-tail, and chilkat, and are elements I incorporate into some of my baskets. So my interest in Maori weaving, which is the taniko, is because of its similarity to raven's tail, so the geometric pattern borders in particular. The main body of work is created with a type of twining, which is similar, but they can have as many as 5 colors can be carried along behind and brought forward to create geometric patterns. Each weft twist occurs between every warp. It is worked from left to right like raven's tail. And besides using many colors, the taniko element that I use the most is a variation of a 2-paired interlocking weft casting on and off technique, which makes it possible to begin twining at the top and work downwards without a header or loom, which forms the upper and lower salvages of my baskets. I don't know if this makes sense, but I'll explain it more later. So this is how I start my baskets. And then this is the casting off, how I end them. So the bottom part of the basket is created with simple looping or knotless netting, which is a common net bag making technique found all over the world. Papua New Guinea billams, Ecuadorian shigras, Colombian bolsas, Panamanian chacras, and Guatemalan morals are a few. Other looping variations, such as figure 8, are common, but simple looping is what I use in my work. And it's similar to crochet or knitting in many ways, but one of the distinct differences is that the working end goes all the way through the loop of the previous row, so that a continuous strand or a ball of fiber cannot be used. In most countries that I learned the looping techniques, the fibrous natural material used is thigh spun as it's needed, so just bit by bit. They don't have a full ball of yarn before they start. And it is continually spun, alternated with the technique of looping for the entire bag. For me, I developed a way to add material as needed. An integral part of research is seeing museum collections. One visit to a museum where I requested to see their Guatemalan net bags, I noticed a net bag that was obviously not the same as the others. As it turned out, it was an Athabascan babiche or caribou net bag, that was accidentally included with the Guatemalan net bags. I had no idea that net bags were part of the northern culture, as I was mostly familiar with net bags of the tropics. I was still in the midst of my Central American research, so I tucked this tidbit of discovery away. Years later, after much thinking and many trials, I developed a basic basket design concept that evolved from understanding these bags. And this one is a beautiful one. So the Athabascan babiche bags are constructed with a top band of hide, caribou hide, and the design traditionally was with porcupine quills, and the bottom is looped caribou sinew. I wanted to combine the 2 techniques I like and know the most, which are twining and simple looping. So I started experimenting with combining and came up with a way to make the top twine band and then the bottom looped. So this was one of my first prototypes, and it's deer hide and then that fake sinew. And so I just kind of did it based on a traditional babiche bag. And then I did this one, which is big, and this is all with agave fiber that I did. So the top part's twined and then it joins into the looped bag. So these are the 2 sort of parts of it. So the top part A would be the caribou hide with the quill, but then I've kind of interpreted it my own way, and that's the part that I twine, and then the bottom part is the looping. Let's see. Most baskets begin at the bottom and are worked to the top opening, but I work in reverse, beginning at the mouth and working towards the bottom. Some of this is because I am comfortable with raven's tail and chilkat weaving, plus most of my basketry classes were in the traditional Haida style, which even though begin with the basket bottom, are woven with the warps facing down. Once I get the warps lined up and everything looks good, I connect them to form a circle and then begin working around my knees. So this is how I work. Oops, how do I get, oh no, that's not there. I don't work around a form as I like being able to access the back, which means that most of my baskets woven in this style have at least 150 warps. So here's a, uh-oh, I think I did something. I hit something and I got this over here now. How do I get it?
I think just click off of it.
Oh. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is one that I've got set up, and I like to work with beads. I love beads. I go to spend a lot of money in bead stores. But so I put the beads on the weft, and then this one actually is only white. The weft is white, and then all the colors are beads. Let's see. So if I twine the entire basket, I would have to decrease down to a few warps, and it gets a little bit difficult. But with the nature of looping, it is easy to decrease as needed, and the tonico casting on and off techniques allow me to work around my knees, combining my love and knowledge of traditional 2- and 3-strand basketry, raven's tail and chilkat weaving, braiding and colorful beads. I bring to the present these amazing techniques into the contemporary textile world. The first basket I wove in this concept was what I call all worlds intertwined, a yellow and red cedar bark. I looped yellow cedar over woven APK, which is a banana leaf fiber from the Philippines. And this, let's see, I found that the bottom structure wasn't as rigid as I wanted, and so all subsequent baskets I looped around round reed, or if I have it, locally harvested honeysuckle vines, creating a somewhat coiling method. This pattern on the basket is All Weavers Intertwined, which was designed by Cheryl Samuel during a Raven's Tail symposium at Ketchikan. And this basket was in Earth Fire Fiber up in Anchorage a few years, when they still had that exhibit a few years ago. So I have two, this is another one, and this one has the reed that's in the looped bottom part, which gives it a little bit more structure. So 2 red and yellow cedar bark baskets are currently displayed in Ketchikan, Tonga's Historical Museum, and they were both part of the body of work that I created for the exhibit A Sense of Place in the Main Street Gallery a couple of years ago, in part funded with the Rasmussen Project Award. In the permanent collection is this basket that I call Trick or Treat, and the patterns are Trick, this is the tail of the raven, a raven's tail pattern, and Treat, this is a snake design from a Panamanian chakara. These are the Panamanian net bags. And then in the temporary exhibit is this is a really large basket called Back and Forth, and it depicts the north, in between each of the colorful panels is the Northwest Coast tree shadow design. And then I'm going to run through each of the other panels. And there's a Panamanian chakara snake, a Colombian YU belt design, a Nicaraguan palm hat, Guatemalan double-headed eagle, a Mexican universe design, and Honduran mat designs, portraying all the trips I took back and forth between Ketchikan and northern Latin America. So I'll run through those. And I would graph them all out on my graph paper. So this is sort of from southern Mexico to northern Colombia. This is the region I went back and forth to over 15 years. So Panama. So one day on a western Panamanian beach, I met a Peace Corps volunteer, and he had a really interesting net bag. And I'm not shy about going up to people that have interesting bags and asking them where they got them or where they're from. So I went up to him and we started talking, and turned out it was a chakra. And I'd been doing my research in Guatemala and told him what I was doing, and he invited me to his site. But unfortunately, I couldn't take him up on his offer, and it was about 5 years later that I was able to take the time to go to his village. Well, of course, he was no longer there, but luckily he was well esteemed and well thought of, and so when I just blindly walked into the village, they welcomed me and put me up and taught me how to make a bag. I spent like 5 days there. So the chakaras, let's see, just a minute. The chakaras are made from wild pineapple, which is this plant, or they call it kiga, and it's used by the Nobe Bugle of northwest Panama and harvested much like maguey, where the leaves are scraped. So the inner fiber is inside of the fleshy green part of the leaf, and then the inner fibers are exposed. The fibers are leg spun and are dyed with beautiful natural materials. The bags, or chakaras, are simple looped, similar to Guatemalan net bags. The origin of this craft has many possibilities, introduced by the Maya, a spider teaching a woman named Masai, or a snake. It is common knowledge that chakaras have a long tradition and hold great cultural and social significance. In some communities, they were part of the women's rite of passage called mogan, when among other important things, she learns how to make a net bag. And this is the woman that was appointed to me to be my teacher. So I spent a few days. They would bring me meals every day, and I bought a lot of fiber, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. So here's a net bag. One of the things the Panamanian bags have that the Guatemalan ones don't are these intricate patterns. The Guatemalan ones all just have stripes. They're either stripes or plain, and the Panamanian ones, really interesting patterns, so I learned how to do that. And I came back to the States with a lot of fiber, and then this was one that I just did kind of in my technique that I've been doing around a gourd, so there's a gourd inside that. But all those colors are all natural dyes, just beautiful colors that they had. Okay, so the next panel is the purple panel, and this is Colombia. So I was touring, there's an underground cathedral in an old salt mine outside of Bogota, and I was going on the tour of the cathedral, and I noticed some net bags, and they weren't made out of maguey or a natural fiber, but they were these beautiful net bags. And so I kind of looked on the label, and I saw where they came from, and I ended up going to this town, which is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So this is the town of Manauri. It's on the Guajira Peninsula, which is the peninsula that Venezuela and Colombia share a border in the Caribbean, in the lowlands. And it's the Wayu people that are known for their textiles, and they make bags and hammocks and belts. And the pattern that I have on my basket is actually a belt pattern. So this was the pattern that I used on my basket. And it was made, let's see, this is the belt, and it's a sira, or a man's belt, and the belt enhanced the status of a man and was proof that he had an intelligent wife, for whom he must have paid a big dowry. It also meant she had the time to do such labor-intensive work and did not have to spend her time looking after cattle or family. Young girls were taught this complex weaving techniques during their initiation period into adulthood. And here's how they're woven on this kind of a loom. But these are the women, sorry, these pictures are so small. The bags were made by this women's co-op, and I happened to arrive there on a Friday, I think, and then they invited me to go out to the village where they made these hammocks. Just fascinating. It was really interesting. Okay, the orange pattern is Nicaragua. So here's a community in Nicaragua. So in Nicaragua, I went to a town called Comaopa, which is known for palm hat making. And the palm in Nicaragua is called palma de pita, and the hat making technique in Honduras, Nicaragua, and Colombia is the same as the famous Panama hat, which is actually made in Ecuador. But it earned the name for a couple of reasons. One is that in the mid-1850s, travelers passing through Panama to the U.S. gold rush bought hats, which were marketed from Ecuador in Panama. And when President Roosevelt visited during the construction of the Panama Canal in 1906, he was photographed wearing one of these hats. So that's why they're called Panama hats. But the Panama hats made in Panama are not made like this. So these are made with kind of a basketry technique. The actual hats made in Panama are made with this technique, and this is a plate coiling technique where there's long braided strips and then they're sewn together in a circle. And this is also how hats are made in Guatemala. So there's the two main hat making techniques. So these are the hats in Nicaragua. And here's the palm. And in their central park there, they have a palm tree and a little explanation about it. Okay, the purple is representing the double-headed eagle in Guatemala. And the harpy eagle is indigenous to Mesoamerica and has special significance to the Maya as a ritual symbol. When the Spanish conquered the Mayas, that coincidentally was also a Spanish symbol and was conferred upon them and incorporated into their textiles. And here I was just going to show you this. This is a typical market stall in Guatemala. And here's a weaver. It's just some Guatemala tortillas. So here's the double-headed eagle. The design was used by nobles and represented the great god who had two faces, one to look forward and the other to look back, one for good and one for evil. And this is how I designed the double-headed eagle. Besides these meanings, dualism and conflict between European and Mayan beliefs are represented in the double-headed eagle. So this, I actually have this textile here, but the double-headed eagle, what did I do with that? What am I going to do with it? Well, it's this part in the middle. Let's see. Okay, the next one is Mexico, and it's the green part. Around San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas, the woven universe design is common in Mayan textiles. All ceremonial huipils portray the world or universe as a diamond and show the sun at noon resting in the center of its daily journey. The four sides represent the boundaries of space and time. The small diamonds at each corner are the cardinal points. And the green on the left is Honduras. So rush, reed, and sometimes palm provide material for plaited mats or petates, one of the earliest forms of weaving in Mesoamerica and an important utilitarian and ritualistic item. They were a symbol of power, especially among the Mayas, and ancient calendars were painted on mats. Pop, which means mat in a Mayan language, is the first month of the Mayan calendar. Once considered a royal tradition, each woven strip represents the reality of time and space, or the Mayan cosmovision, and one of the Maya Quiche's ancient tradition dictated that their leader, called Ahu Apop, king of the mats, sit on a mat. A couple of Honduran women's groups in a community near Santa Barbara, oops, this is just a market scene, weave mats, and they weave them out of this. This is a reed that they make the mats out of. And they cut them up and they make contemporary, like cell phone holders, purses, bags, tablet holders, whatever the market demands. Okay. The month after the Ketchikan exhibit, I presented a paper at Textim 2, a Mesoamerica textile symposium at the Museo Textil in Oaxaca, Mexico. So this is one of my breakfast. This is what I woke up to every morning. It was wonderful. So one day I wore this was the Sense of Place exhibit in Ketchikan, but I wanted to put this in here because it shows the blouse that I'm wearing. And it's a embroidered blouse from a village near Oaxaca that I had bought a couple years earlier. And one day I was wearing this at the symposium, and a young woman approached me and recognized it as her mother's work. And so she invited me to her village. So I took the bus, and before I met up with her, I decided to have one of the town's specialties, which was an empanada. They were fabulous. But I was sitting at this table, and this isn't a touristy place at all. The town of San Antonino is where they make the embroidered blouses. But I was sitting at a table, and a young boy approached me and said he wanted to interview me for a school project. So I said, sure, why not? So I answered all of his questions. He wrote it down in his notebook, and I went back to my food. And a few minutes later, on a loudspeaker, his father announced that I was in their village and welcomed me, and it was very embarrassing. But it turned out that his father had been in the States and had worked at a public radio station. It was just hilarious. So it made it an event. It was pretty funny. But so what happened? So after this trip, and it was actually pretty much about 3 years ago today, on my way home, I met my husband in Seattle for what was supposed to be a routine doctor's appointment and a flight back to Ketchikan a couple days later. He ended up being admitted, getting on the list, and ultimately having a liver transplant on December 19th. Because of many complications and a difficult recovery, he was not discharged until mid-June of 2017. We still could not return home until September. I mostly lived in his hospital room with him, and this is when basket weaving kept me from literally becoming a basket case. So once I realized we would not be returning home right away, I wandered the university district and a bit beyond looking for weaving supplies. I decided on colorful wax linen, thread, beads, and a fabulous waxed cotton warp that I discovered at a bead store. Graph paper I bought at the university bookstore. I also went on long daily walks. Saturdays, I usually incorporated the university farmers market into my route, and Sundays I took the bus to the Ballard Farmers Market and then to Fremont before the bus transfer ran out, and then walked back to the hospital. Sometimes I walked north on the Burt Gilman and other days south. Between walking and weaving, I maintained my sanity during this difficult time period. I wove the top twine bands in the hospital, but did not finish the cedar bark loop bottoms until we returned to Ketchikan. This was for many reasons. I did not have any cedar bark, and some people are allergic to it, and I did not want it in the hospital. And it was easier to transport the bands back folded up in my suitcase than as an entire basket. So this is some of my patterns that I started coming up with in the hospital. And so this is like the band that I wove. So it took me about a month to weave each one of these. So I did like about 10 of them, these bands that I brought back to the hospital. And those are beads and wax linen. The white's all beads and the gray are beads as well. So this is the one that's out in the exhibit here. And so here it shows the top band, and I'm still working on the bottom. And you can see that woven APK, that's that banana leaf fiber. And I buy it by the yard, and it's kind of on the back side. And I just incorporate it. Gives it a nice texture and also provides a little bit more structure to the basket. But if you look I think you can see in the case, you can look inside and see the woven APK in there. But I incorporate that in most of my baskets. So the first, in what has become an ongoing series, was this one, which is in the exhibit. And this is Memories of Mexico. So this was the first one I wove. And then I wove this one, which is called the transplant. So the top border is the W for the waiting period. The next is the bad liver. The next is the good liver. And then the bottom band is the R for recovery. So typically, well, if it's a typical situation, it's about a 3-month period that we would have been away from home. So it got to be like February or so, and there was no end in sight. So that was when I wove this one, which is in the exhibit in the museum. So this is called Winter Blues with a Hint of Hope. And then I kept going. So then I wove this one. The anti-rejection drugs that he took for his liver made him delirious. So he was really out of it for about 3 months. And then they switched drugs. And so this one I call Coming Out on the Other Side. So then I wove this one. And then I did this one. And this one is called Are You In or Out? Because at that time he was on dialysis, and we don't have dialysis in Ketchikan, a clinic. And so he was going to have to go on peritoneal dialysis, and I was going to have to be his 24/7 caregiver, and the doctor wanted to know if I was in or out. So that was when I wove this one. And then probably about March or April, I wove this one, which is called Thinking of Home. It has a little bit of raven's tail in the trees. And you can see I've got around the tree, there's a little bit of 3-strand, there's some braiding. So I incorporate a lot of different techniques from all the different weaving that I've learned. And this one I call Interpreting the Gray Areas. Because, you know, the doctors and the nurses, they'd come around and make rounds, and they'd tell me things, and they'd tell him things, and there's a lot of gray area in there, you know, so I was trying to interpret everything, because it was a big responsibility once he got out with everything that he needed. So finally, in the middle of June, he was released. He was discharged, so this one was released. And then he was still on dialysis, and we couldn't come back to Ketchikan, so we went to a place called Glacier on the Mount Baker Highway outside of Bellingham. My parents have a condo up there, so we went up there for 2.5 months. So I wove the North Fork of the Nooksack because it's on the Nooksack River, and I used to do walks along the Nooksack. So we went there until his kidneys finally recovered, so he didn't have to be on dialysis anymore, which was great. And the transplant team released him. They said we could go home. So September, almost a year later, we finally went home. So while we were in Seattle, we had 7 cats. So I had a friend that was living on a boat with 2 cats and a dog, and we invited her to live in our house and take care of our 7 cats with her 2 cats and a dog. So she, and then after we got back, she moved next door, so we both watch each other's cats still. But so I wove her this basket. So this basket I call 7 Cats, and it has all of our cats on it. Okay, so I thought that was going to be the end of it, but in November of this past year, actually almost a year ago, his kidneys failed again, and so he had to go back on dialysis. So we actually came to Juneau in July and went through the training, and he's now on peritoneal dialysis. So we're dealing with that now, and I call this changing directions. So this is a more recent one that I made. And this one is the double-headed eagle. I call this 2 heads are better than 1. And then this one is, I call it Zigs and Zags. And that's it. And I have some things to show you too, because I have another one that I started, but I ran out of beads. And I can pass this around if you want, so you can sort of see what my bands are like. But I call this one highs and lows and ups and downs and backs and forth because of all that. I can't step away from the mic, can I? Oh, there's that mic. So I think I'll pass these around, don't you think? Yeah. So you can kind of see a little bit of my process and how I do it. And I have some other items. So there's a few books here. This is about the Taniko, the Maori techniques. Or should I leave them here, or leave them here? I don't know. This is about the babiche bags, the net bags, and it's also a section on how to make one. And then this is on the double-headed eagle and some of the Guatemalan techniques. And this is that we peel, and there's the double-headed eagle is right in the middle here. And then this is a we peel with the universe pattern, all those diamonds. And here's one of those belts from Colombia. So, and then these are some net bags. So this is a Colombian bolsa, and this is from agave fiber. This is from Paraguay, also agave fiber. And this is a chacara from Panama, and it's the wild pineapple fiber and all those natural dyes in there. And then this is a shigra from Ecuador. And then this is one of those neat little betel nut containers from Indonesia. These are really cool. They were so cheap. They were like $5, and I mean, I have so many of these. But do you want me to leave them here, or should I pass them around?
Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, yeah. Any questions? So anyways, that's kind of how the baskets evolved and how the 2 in the exhibit, how they ended up, the designs and why they aren't all cedar bark on the top, because I worked with the wax linen and the beads in the hospital. So I made those in the hospital. And my husband's doing pretty good now, in spite of the dialysis. His liver is great. His transplant was a success after all this time. But so he'll be 3 years, December 19th. Yeah. So, thanks. Thank you. Thank you.